It's payday, and before you blow your paycheck, let me tell you why going to college, getting married, and buying a house could actually diminish your wealth if you're black. In 2021, tax professor Dorothy A. Brown published The Whiteness of Wealth, How the Tax System Impoverishes Black Americans and How We Can Fix It. In this book, Dorothy breaks down how the federal government incrementally taxes black people for their existence. Yes, your existence. Y'all can't even lie, like, this book was so crazy because you'll read it and like this shit, you'll read this shit and it's like, oh man, like, can we ever really get out of this shit, right? And so before we even jump into the book review itself, just want to point out a couple of things. I know I was very provocative at the beginning of the reel. I genuinely, absolutely love black love. I am an advocate for more black love. I am an advocate for more black marriages. I'll also always advocate for education, and more education. Like, I'll never not be that person who's not talking about you need to educate yourself more. And then our history is too flooded with black people who did too much for themselves for me not to put an extra emphasis on ownership. Next, Ms. Dorothy A. Brown actually went to law school for tax law. She then graduated law school and then started practicing tax law. She then got that education and that experience and then became a professor of tax law. So if I'm reading this off and you find yourself getting upset, white conservative man, if you find yourself getting upset, closeted racist who's posing as a white liberal, if you find yourself getting upset, self-hating Negro, just understand that somebody smarter than you wrote a book and comprised so much information and stats that your feelings don't matter in comparison to what the stats have to say. Another point, incremental is the word. Incremental. These tax laws and these stats and all of these things have incrementally widened the wealth gap. And so with that being said, let's get the review started. Listen, I'm just a closeted racist who's posing as a white liberal, but I'm sure if black people just went to college more, then they can close the wealth gap. Nothing I love more from my white liberal friends than pseudo-optimism. Let me actually, I agree with you in the component of like education is necessary, but in the book, Dorothy argues it's more of an institutional thing, not necessarily the students per se, right? So let me just give you a couple of reads real quick. The missing link when it comes to resources in higher education is college endowment, and of course, the tax policies surrounding them that keep selective, predominantly white institutions wealthy. Hold on. By saving enough money to cover costs with plenty left over, thanks in part to income and property tax exemptions, the wealthiest nonprofit colleges and universities avoid paying taxes on that excess, enabling them to save even more. Better outcomes, better resources. Why wouldn't all black college students simply choose selective institutions? Because these same institutions disproportionately admit white students, leaving black students attending under-resourced colleges and falling financially further behind. One more, and I think this may actually pertain to you, white liberal. Blacks attending colleges are more likely not only to take out student loans, but also to take out larger student loans than white college students. Why? Because debt is the key mechanism of financing a college education for black students. White college students are far more likely to have their college education paid for by parents or grandparents, a form of what in tax law we call family financial transfers. Well, I'm a white conservative man, and I bought my house without a college degree, so I don't understand what all this college talk is about. Why don't you just buy a house? All right, my white conservative fellow man. So these words that I'm about to read, they come from a black woman, so you may not respect them. Let's just act like these words came from a man who has 3 baby mamas who just so happen to be sitting in the White House right now. Let's just hear what he has to say. White America preferences create what I call an appreciation gap. That depresses the market value of homes in diverse or all black neighborhoods while increasing the value of homes in all white neighborhoods. This is why home ownership is not a straightforward wealth builder for black families, because the only guaranteed return on their investment is to buy in a community where there will be a small and vulnerable minority. Well, I'm a self-hating Negro. If y'all just stop laying around having babies with each other, we could actually start building some real wealth. If it isn't the biggest stumbling block to black people's liberation, the self-hating Negro. I'm a white woman and I had to wait an extra 2 whole minutes in line today at the Whole Foods. This is an atrocity. I'm actually glad both of you guys are here, right? Like, let me read this one passage. Self-hating Negro, you hate yourself, so God be with you. White woman, Your own white man doesn't like you. Let me, in fact, show you how his attack on you actually just negatively affected us. And although it's possible that no one in Congress was considering the effect on black families when the Tax Reform Act of 1969 was passed, a Senate could argue that they were certainly thinking about specific types of white married couples. The penalties enacted in the law protected the labor market advantage of white men by encouraging their competition, white women, to stay out of the paid workforce. It was simple. Marriage to and financial dependency on a working white man was rewarded with a tax cut. If you wanted to work as much as your husband, no tax cut for you. If you wanted to be equal in the home or outside of the home by financially contributing as much as he did, tax policy would punish you. Why is that so crazy, you ask? A study of black and white families over a 25-year period between 1984 and 2009 showed that getting married increased white wealth by more than $75,000, but did nothing to increase black wealth. All that discourse that y'all be having online about to date and not to date and who's single and all that dumb shit. Meanwhile, the federal government is incrementally just snatching more money out of everybody's pockets, especially black people's pockets. Again, Dorothy A. Brown goes in, she says, as income increases, black couples are still more likely to be in co-equal households to a greater extent than white peers because of black wives' significant earnings compared with their husbands. High-income married black couples who are in the best position to save more, invest more, and build more wealth are instead paying Uncle Sam more for the privilege of being married. Again, I am all for black love. I am all for black people going to college. I am all for education. And I am most certainly all about ownership. But in this book, there is such a thing as systematic institutional racism. It is embedded in our tax codes. And so she walks through this entire book. Not just, she goes off. She has 6 chapters. Married While Black, Black House, White Market, The Great Unequalizer, The Best Jobs, Legacy, and What's Next. I'm gonna do a whole different reel for the legacy one because that chapter was absolutely fucking crazy. But in the final chapter in What's Next, in true typical professor form, she is like, hey, this is well-researched, well-documented. These are things that we can do to help decrease the wealth gap. But 2 things that she said actually that were like, One thing she said, she was like, hey, we need to like radically just change this entire system. A very professional way of saying this capitalistic shit ain't working for black people, it need to go. And then she sit back and follow that up. She says the word that self-hating Negroes hate and white conservatives absolutely abhor. She said that R word, reparations. She talks about jobs. White people will sit back and claim that black people don't want to work, but she will sit back and say in this book, in which she is a tax professor, she practiced tax law, she went to school for this, she'll sit back and say, whoa, the studies show, not only are we working, but we are willing to work. Not only are we willing to work, these same companies are systematically underpaying us and overworking us. And I'm gonna wrap this shit up with this. This book starts off by Dorothy sitting back saying, she thought that the tax code, she thought that money, she thought that shit was colorblind. Until she did her own parents' taxes. Sat back, said, I did my parents' taxes and I realized these mofos were just scamming and taking all types of money off my parents. My parents were severely abused, like most black families. Whiteness of Wealth, Dorothy A. Brown. Like if you enjoyed this segment, share if it could benefit others, subscribe for more book-related content. Till then, stay in the book or stay the absolute fuck out of everybody's way if you're not trying to make a positive difference.